2020 proved that panic buying is just part of the equation. Anytime there's a national crisis or emergency, you can expect people to react in the same exact way as they did during March of 2020, especially when you're talking about toilet paper. But keep this in mind because right now, with what's happening in the world, one of our biggest concerns is the idea of a nuclear event taking place. And do you think people would panic buy in response to a nuclear event the same way that they did in the spring of 2020? And my answer to that question is yes. And in fact, we have historical precedent that shows that that's exactly what would happen. Now, why is this an issue? Well, keep in mind that our grocery stores and our big box stores would not be able to support the level of demand that would be placed upon them if that much panic buying was to occur right now. Our supply chain is still broken, our labor shortages are still existent, and our grocery stores have not been able to get back up to 100% capacity. So if that panic buying returns, expect those stores to literally fail. And if you're preparing to have to rely on anything other than a grocery store for your food source at some point in time in the future, then hit the subscribe button below because this is what we need to be preparing for based on what has happened before. Now, in 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK did a televised speech telling the American people what was happening there. Well, immediately people responded to it by panic buying. They went out to their grocery stores and they started buying all kinds of things. They bought sugar, coffee, canned meats, canned pemmican, as well as bottled water. They also bought some supplies, including 5-gallon water cans, water purification tablets, mess kits, and they bought small alcohol stoves as well as MREs. They were basically preparing for a nuclear war because they just really weren't sure how things were going to go, and they wanted to make sure they at least had the bare minimum to try to survive the best way they could. And if a nuclear event happened in Europe right now, you know people would feel the same exact way. They would be scared of a nuclear war and they would react to it in that same manner. Now, here's the thing. Back in 2020, all these stores got together and scrambled as hard as they could to make as much as they could out of the situation in the sense of supplying people with what it was they needed. They wouldn't be able to do that now. The supply chain has been broken for this much time and has not recovered at all, so therefore people would not actually get out and receive the things that they were hoping to get, which causes everything to become very desperate and scary very quickly. Now, what happened in 2003 surrounding grocery stores was very interesting because in 2003, grocery stores around the country were actually preparing for panic buying based on the fact that they knew the Iraq war was about to begin. And they thought that Americans would see a war starting and get concerned and want to get more supplies and stock up. So the stores themselves started to prepare by getting more bottled water, getting more batteries, getting more flashlights, and just stocking up in general on things like canned food, knowing that the American people might be uncomfortable and feel the need to stock up. That's what they did back then. Our stores aren't able to do that now. They literally can't even stock up for normal business anymore, let alone prepare extra food for whatever might happen regarding some type of wartime scenario. Now in 2003, and this is where you should really pay attention because I will have links down in the description as well as in the pinned comments to the articles I'm referencing for this video. But what I want you to pay attention to is their thought process back then on short-term versus long-term duration conflicts and how it would affect trying to keep groceries in stock and keeping the American people fed, okay? Back then, a short-term conflict, in their opinion, meant like 2 or 3 weeks. So it would cause no shortages and not really be an issue if it was a short-term conflict because all the things that they needed were already in the pipeline on their way to be distributed. Therefore, there wouldn't really be any disruptions because they already have the goods on order that are on their way to them in order to get through that short of an event, right? But what they were concerned about back then, in 2003, was a long duration conflict, all right? Because they were worried about things that impacted shipping lanes, they were worried about the price of oil going up, and they were worried about distribution and everything else being impacted by a long-term conflict, especially related to the resources that were being exported depending on whatever region that conflict was in. And here we are in 2022, right? Where we have a long-term conflict occurring over in Eastern Europe that has impacted shipping lanes, has caused havoc when it came to oil prices, and has also caused issues related to the export of grain, right? Now, in 2022, there's a lot of other things we've had to worry about and be concerned about, but I wanted you to be aware of the fact that panic buying is not sustainable and will likely happen once again before we ever get back to 100%. Grocery stores are still experiencing shortages. My grocery store constantly has shortages. The shelves are empty in many different parts of the store. You don't always find exactly what you're looking for, and the things that are there are very expensive, okay? Costs have significantly increased, and a war is happening right now that fits the criteria for what they were worried about back in 2003. So if we have our own Cuban Missile Crisis, once again, here in our generation, understand that our grocery stores and big box stores are likely to fail that test because they've already gotten through it once and haven't recovered from that time yet again. And here we are, acting like everything's back to normal and living in our normalcy bias bubbles, expecting food to always be on the shelf every time we show up to the store. And all it takes is one nuclear event to push people over the edge to go back to panic buying once again. And I'm warning you about this right now because I want you to be prepared to not have to worry about that level of panic buying affecting you. Understand that if a nuclear bomb goes off, it doesn't matter if it's today, tomorrow, it doesn't matter where it is, if one goes off or a nuclear event of any kind happens, even some type of Chernobyl type event, people will likely panic buy in response to it. But this time around, there won't be anything to panic buy. And the supplies will run out so quickly that these stores and distributors won't know what to do about it because they already scrambled and got through it once, but they won't be able to do it again. And so I wanted you to consider this and be aware of it, be prepared for these things to happen, and that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.